You may be seated. Let us pray. God, thank you for this time this morning to gather and to hear from your word, to open and search the scriptures for what you have for us this morning. Help us to use what we learned today to love you and to love our neighbors more and better. In Jesus' name, amen. This morning's sermon is on the Ten Commandments, or the Big Ten, as I call them on my bulletin board. I don't know if you can tell, but Charlton Heston from the blockbuster movie back in the day, the Ten Commandments. This is former judge from Alabama, Roy Moore, and his monument of the Ten Commandments. It eventually got kicked out of the courthouse that it was in, and that caused no amount of upset people all over the place. People were pretty concerned about that, but there was some controversy. One person who spoke to that, who was kind of unexpected, was the comedian George Carlin. He said, "You can't post, 'Thou shalt not steal, you shall not commit adultery, and you shall not lie' in a building full of lawyers, judges, and politicians." It creates a hostile work environment. But it's been a little controversial, and granted, the Ten Commandments, it can be funny, but it's not just a way to poke fun at other people and measure how bad other people are, lawyers and judges and politicians. It's also a way to consider how we can love God and love our neighbor more and better. So, it's really important to have the Ten Commandments in the courthouse, right? But the question is, do we know the Ten Commandments? So I have a little quiz. It's not really a quiz. Anyone know the first commandment? You shall love the Lord your God. No other gods before me. Yeah, you shall have no other gods before me. Second commandment? You shall not make for yourself a graven image. Good. Do you know all of these?
Yes, I do.
I know they're not in order.
Okay, Mary Ray knows all of them. Anyone else? What's the third one? Love your neighbor is, we'll get to love your neighbor. It's not explicitly, love your neighbor isn't explicitly on in the Big Ten as love your neighbor. It's in 6 other commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain is number 3. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy is the 4th one. Yeah, honor your father and mother. Anyone remember the next one? Murder. Next one? You shall not commit adultery. What's the next one? Show me you shall not steal. I was going to do family feud, but that would have just taken way too long. Next one? You shall not bear false witness. And 10. Everyone knows this one probably. More people know this one probably. You shall not covet. Okay, you shall not covet. Okay, so that's a thing that we might want to work on. If we want it in a courthouse, maybe we should get it in our hearts first. This isn't to guilt anyone. I've been standing up here, I've been working on this sermon all weekend, and I almost thought you shall not steal was number 6. Or number 7. So, it's a little challenge sometimes to remember all the 10 Commandments. The other thing, you mentioned, help me with your name again? I knew this a minute ago.
Ralph.
What? Ralph, yes, I knew that. Ralph mentioned you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The reformers, the people who got us to being Presbyterian, well, sort of, divided the commandments into 2 tablets, love God, love your neighbor. The love for God was, you shall have no other gods, before me no graven images, not taking God's name in vain and remembering the Sabbath. These are commandments that relate to our relationship with God, and the others, honor your father and mother, don't murder, commit adultery, steal, bear false witness, or covet, these relate to how we can love our neighbor. And forgive me, there's a lot I'm going to refer back to my notes from time to time because I don't want to spend too long, because there are 10 commandments here, and I can't spend too long on many of them. I think a lot of times when we hear sermons about sin, I'm tempted to feel kind of guilty and just not do anything, and sometimes I've been in the presence of pastors who are tempted to try to make people feel guilty for not following the 10 commandments. But the point of this sermon isn't to make anyone feel guilty. It's not about let's keep these commandments so that we can earn God's love or approval, because God already loves us. No caveats, no ifs, no ands or buts. God loves us. This is about how we can live God's way in the world, how we can live, like I said when I preached a few times ago, how we can live in who we really are as the people of God. They say you're not supposed to have a ton of points. I broke that rule. I have 10. With sub-points. Each of these could be its own sermon, so I'm going to try to go through it as quickly as I can, and maybe we'll be out of here by 5. Tomorrow. Okay, so, number 1, I'm the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. Anybody have other gods? Anyone planning on going home and praying to Baal? Zeus? Anybody going to make an offering to Diana? No? Okay, so we can probably move on. You shall not make for yourself an image. Anybody planning on going home and carving a statue of God? Anybody know what God looks like? Okay, we're probably okay here. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. This is an interesting one.
Yes.
I think a lot of people assume that it means you hit your hand with a hammer and you say, Jesus Christ, or something along those lines. And the reformers, the folks who got us here, they believed that that was one way, that we do need to respect God's name and not just use it lightly. And I think that's a good way of thinking about this commandment. But there's more to it. There's more to that commandment. Because when it talks about taking the name of the Lord your God in vain, when you would take God's name in the Old Testament times, it was for an oath. I swear by the Lord that I will do such and such a thing, or I swear by the Lord that I will, or that this is true. And if you don't mean it, or if you end up not doing that, you're taking the name in vain. And one of the things when we get to Jesus, Jesus says, it was said, you shall not make your oaths falsely, but I say, don't make any oaths at all. And there are some Christian traditions that don't take oaths. They will say, I affirm, but they won't say, I swear, and they won't swear on the Bible or anything like that. I don't know if anyone here does that, but that's one way that people have kept that commandment. Another thing about taking the name of the Lord in vain that I've seen, a few weeks ago, there was a story on the news about someone who went to a restaurant and was representing a church, picked up a bunch of stuff, and didn't leave any kind of tip at all. I think that's one way that when we say we take the name of the Lord in vain, I think we can take it for ourselves, say, I'm a Christian, but it doesn't mean anything because we're not living in a way that well represents Christ. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. There's a lot of text, we're going to skip some of that. Chick-fil-A, they're closed on Sunday because their owner believes that it's very important to give his employees a day off. I respect that and I deeply appreciate it. I don't always want Chick-fil-A, but when I do, it's Sunday. The 4th commandment is, for some, I think it's a transitional commandment. And doesn't just belong on the love for God side. It does have, God bless the Sabbath and made it holy, remember the Sabbath because of God. But on the other hand, it says, no one's working, not your son, not your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your animals, your foreigners. Nobody is working on the Sabbath. Nobody. So it's love for God and it's also love for your neighbor. But the other thing is, it's also love for yourself. It says, you shall not work on the Sabbath, you or any of these people. You appears twice. And I think that's important because it's also about loving yourself. Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, right? What if you don't love yourself? You're not going to love your neighbor very well. If I think, I'm just a lazy person and I don't deserve a day off. Am I going to give my neighbor a day off? Do I think my neighbor deserves a day off?
Yeah.
Nope. So, you appears twice. Love yourself. You don't work on the Sabbath. My first job, I told my boss I wasn't going to work on Sunday. I said, I can't do that. It goes against my religion. He said, that's okay. It's like, that's great. I worked a lot of Saturdays. But the word Sabbath, I looked it up. It means stop. It means stop doing what you're doing. I read an article by Eugene Peterson a while ago. He's a well-known Presbyterian pastor, and he translated a version of the Bible called The Message. He said one of the ways that he keeps the Sabbath is he does nothing necessary. Nothing necessary. If it has to get done, it doesn't get done on the Sabbath. And because he's a preacher, he can't take Saturday off and he can't take Sunday off, so he takes Monday as his Sabbath, as his day to stop. At the moment, my day is Saturday. I don't think that that will last super long, but for now, it's working. And when it doesn't, I move it to Monday. And I think that that's really important. We have to stop and we have to not work. This comes from the Jewish people working in Egypt. They were slaves. They worked all the time, 7 days a week. And God said, you're free people. You don't work 1 day a week. You take a day off. It starts in creation. God says, God creates all this stuff, said it was very good, and then God said, I'm going to rest. The seventh day of creation is rest. Now you see why we went so fast through the first two. Okay, honor your father and mother. And I got to go with my notes because there's a lot I have to say about this one. This has caused me some trouble because it was used to abuse me as a child, and I've done the best that I could sometimes to pretend that everything was okay, to honor my father who was abusive. I went to therapy. It took me a while because every time my therapist would say, so tell me about these things that your dad did to you, I'd be like, well, he's not really all that bad. And I would try to honor him, but it was working against me getting better. So I don't think that God's calling us to pretend that our parents were something that they weren't. And God doesn't ask us, I don't think, to stay in abusive situations. It's not for parents to beat onto their children. Maybe a flip side for this would be for parents to be honorable. I hope that I was the exception rather than the rule, and the rest of you have loving and decent parents, so you're not off the hook. And if you're an adult, you're not off the hook. There's a story where Jesus talks about people who give away the money that was supposed to go to support their aging parents. And he says, you guys have violated the fifth commandment by not taking care of your parents and saying, well, I'm going to give the money to God. And I want to call out there, here at All Union, I've seen a lot of people taking care of their parents and honoring their parents. And I'm just really pleased and proud to be here and just to be able to watch people honoring the fifth commandment in that way. So that's really cool. Okay. Next one, you shall not murder. That's pretty simple. Anybody murdered anybody? Okay, but when we get to Jesus in the New Testament, he says, you've heard it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder. But I say, anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Anyone who says to a brother or sister, raka, or empty head, he says, oh, you're stupid, will be answered to the court. Anyone who says, you fool, will be answered, danger of the fire of hell. Well, how did we get there? There's a move that the reformers took, following Jesus, to internalize the commandment. It's not just you shall not murder. It's about being angry. It's the inside piece. You internalize the commandment. And he also broadens the commandment. It's not just about murder. It's about being demeaning. And this is the Book of Confessions for the Presbyterian Church USA. It's an old version. it has a lot of things in it that, it's a bunch of confessions. So throughout Christian history, people have gone and said, what's the really important stuff about the Christian faith? And there's about 12 or 13 confessions in here. One of them, bear with me, Heidelberg Catechism, and it has a bunch of questions and answers for people to teach them what's the important stuff about the Christian faith. Heidelberg Catechism was supposed to go over the space of a year. Okay, and one of the questions in Heidelberg Catechism, sorry, we're getting there. What's God's will in the sixth commandment? I'm not to belittle, hate, insult, or kill my neighbor. Not by thoughts, words, look, or gesture, certainly not by actual deeds, and I'm not to harm or recklessly endanger myself either. That's a lot bigger than you shall not murder. And again, keep in mind, this isn't about guilting anyone. This is about how can I look for ways to love God and my neighbor. Because if you step back and you say, love your neighbor as yourself, if you love your neighbor, are you going to belittle your neighbor?
No.
Hate your neighbor? Insult your neighbor? Kill your neighbor? They also said, does this refer only to murder? By forbidding murder, God teaches us God hates the root of murder. Envy, hatred, anger, vindictiveness. And says, in God's sight, all such are disguised forms of murder. Is it enough we don't murder our neighbor in any such way? God wants us to be patient, peace-loving, gentle, merciful, friendly. Protect them from harm and do good even to our enemies, which is what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, to love your enemies. I want to rewind real quick to the first commandment. This is the only time we're doing this. Where he says, you shall have no other gods before me. What's the Lord require? I avoid and flee all idolatry. Any idolaters here? No, as far as we know, no idolaters. Then they ask, what is idolatry? They say it's to imagine or possess something to put your trust in instead of or beside the one true God. This is where it gets fun. One Bible verse, some trust in chariots, some in horses. We trust the name of the Lord our God. We don't have chariots, we don't have horses. We have a military that we spend more money on than a bunch of other countries. And I worry that sometimes in America we put our trust in our military rather than in God. Or, this is a real news article. In Smith & Wesson we trust. Sometimes we can be tempted to trust other things. This is my temptation. I don't have a Bank of America account, but I don't trust in riches. I'm not rich. But I'm tempted to put my trust in having enough money in my bank account. This isn't to say that we're supposed to... Wait, how did we get there? We're jumping back. This isn't to say that we make bad financial decisions or anything like that. I think we have to... God does call us to be wise in the use of our money, but we don't want to make an idol out of it. We don't want to say, well, I've got enough money in my bank account, so I don't have to pray or be concerned about anything. Sometimes we're tempted to trust in political parties. In Obama we trust, in Trump we trust. The trick, seriously, that's an actual book. I found that meme on the internet. We're not supposed to trust either of them in the way that we trust God. We're not looking to political parties or political power for salvation. We're looking to God. Again, I don't think that God's calling us to make bad decisions. Our trust is in God, not in these other things. Okay, fast forward. You shall not commit adultery. Jesus says, you've heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but if you look at a woman lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. And I've seen this, and I've lived with how complicated this can be. If you see someone says, don't think about purple elephants, you're all thinking about purple elephants. Don't look at someone lustfully, oh, too late. And I don't think that that was the purpose of that commandment. The purpose is if you're like, he says, do not look at a woman to lust after her. The point being, it's a matter of purpose. It's not a matter of, oh, now my brain's going there. It's a matter of intention. If you're doing stuff to intentionally, that's one way to internalize the commandment. You could also broaden the commandment. You could say, how can I work on making sure that my own marriage is stronger? things like that. Okay, 8th commandment, you shall not steal. Any thieves? Nobody's volunteering as a thief? Okay, back to Heidelberg Catechism. God requires that I do whatever I can for my neighbor's good, which if you love your neighbor, this is what you're going to do. Treat others as I would like them to treat me. Where'd they get that? Golden rule. And that I work faithfully so I may share with those in need. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You would think this is probably not a big deal. Not many of us have been in court, I don't think, and lied about people, right? But wait, there's more. And if I were a lying preacher, I would say we're almost done. Kind of almost done. What's the aim of the 9th commandment? That I never give false testimony against anyone, twist no one's words, nor gossip or slander, join in condemning anyone rashly without hearing. Twist no one's words. It's hard to run a political campaign without that. I love the truth, speak it candidly and openly acknowledge, and this is the part that really kicked me. I should do what I can to guard and advance my neighbor's good name. That's an interesting one. Who has Facebook? Can I see hands? Because Kristen told me that a lot of people wouldn't get this. Facebook is... I didn't see the flyer. Okay. So we got a pretty decent amount here. Facebook is one of the places where I've seen people bearing false witness more than anything else. It's unbelievable. In fact, Twitter, different social media. I found this article on Thursday. Twitter users seem to almost prefer sharing falsehoods.
Yeah.
And when they control for stuff, falsehoods were 70% more likely to get retweeted than accurate news. 70% more likely to put lies. But those lies are often about other people, usually about people we don't like. I've seen this one so many times. It says, if I were to run, I'd run as a Republican. It was supposedly from People magazine, 1998. The dumbest group of voters in the country. They believe anything on Fox News, I could lie and they'd eat it up. I bet my numbers would be terrific. People magazine, 1998. Never happened. This interview was not real, and I've seen so many of my friends share this, and they go, see? It's an insult to Donald Trump, and it's an insult to Republicans, and it's never happened. This isn't a real thing. And on the other hand, look, the average Democratic voter is just plain stupid. They're easy to manipulate. That's the easy part. Guess what? Never happened. See, but we attempted to believe things about other people. We're more tempted to bear false witness, to smear the reputation, even unintentionally. I've shared one or two of these myself. And then been called on, and they're like, no, that never happened. Oops. And so, whichever side I see this stuff on, I try to go on and say, that's actually not true, because I'm trying to defend my neighbor's good name, or my neighbor's name such as it is. 10th commandment, you shall not covet. And this is the internalizing of you shall not steal. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, male, female servant, ox, donkey, anything that belongs to your neighbor. This is the internalizing of you shall not steal. It's okay. But if you forget everything else, if all those 10 commandments and all this time we've spent going over the 10 commandments is gone, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no greater commandment than these. If you forget everything else,